Hello, overcomers, and welcome to this episode of Connect Over Coffee. We are opening 2023 with a lot of hope on the horizon for ovarian cancer. And here to tell us more about it, no one other than Dr. Rob Coleman. So, Dr. Coleman, as you know, is the Chief Science Officer at US Oncology and Overcome's advisory board member. And of course, one of the top global experts in the field of ovarian cancer. Regarded as a giant in this field, we think Dr. Coleman's passion for our overcomers is absolutely unmatched. So we have a lot to chat with him today as I said, as we open 2023 with hope on the horizon for ovarian cancer. So grab your favorite beverage or coffee. I have mine, and let's connect over coffee with Dr. Coleman. And if you have any questions as we go along, please type in the comment sections below, and we will get it addressed post the discussion. And as I always say, please share this video far and wide with anyone who may benefit from all these pearls of wisdom and insights Dr. Coleman is about to share with us today. So with that, a huge welcome to you. Welcome back to you, Dr. Coleman, to this opening episode of Connect Over Coffee for 2023. Such an honor to have you back with us.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Oh my gosh. And thanks for doing this and having the venue to be able to reach so many people. We're so excited. It's been a great time. And I really appreciate your efforts in spreading the word.
Thank you. So, as I said, we are excited about this year and what it has to offer for ovarian cancer patients and survivors. But before that, tell us about, the three most exciting advances, according to you, that happened in 2022, and what should our overcomers know about their promises in advancing treatment for ovarian cancer?
Yeah, so I think there's been a number of high-profile events that have happened in 2022. Probably the two biggest ones were the readout of the Athena trial, which was looking at another PARP inhibitor in primary ovarian cancer management. Not a new story, but a new agent. And of course, this is important because this specific trial is actually one that is going to be also looking at the addition of immunotherapy to a PARP inhibitor in a prospective way. And these trials this trial adds to the three others that we are expecting to hear about very shortly that are looking at this kind of a strategy for frontline treatment. So it was a very important report. It came out of ASCO last year, and provided I think a platform for new drug development, and obviously one we're going to capitalize on very, very quickly. The second one, I think most people were anticipating very much so, was the readout of the SORAYA trial. The SORAYA trial was looking at mirvetuximab soravtansine, which is a antibody drug conjugate. And this particular antibody drug conjugate, targets folate receptor alpha to bring chemotherapy directly to the tumor sites. And we had heard about this drug for some time. I think we actually reviewed it on one of our conversations over coffee in the past, when we were disappointed with its initial phase 3 results. And we learned from that study that maybe we were selecting patients not as precisely as we should have. So we rewrote that program with two studies, the phase 3 of SORAYA, which I was fortunate to co-lead with my good friend Ursula Matalonis, many of you may also know. And that paper should be coming out any day. It was accepted at the Journal of Clinical Oncology. And it demonstrated, single agent efficacy in rates that actually kind of exceeded our expectations. And so we're very hopeful that the accelerated approval that was granted by the FDA at the end of last year will turn into a regular approval, so that this drug will be, on our available therapy for our patients. So that was again another win, big win for us, as it adds, to a fairly limited kind of, portfolio of newly active drugs. The third thing I think was, which is something I want to say is a advance in 2022, was really the explosion of clinical trial opportunities. So we have seen unprecedented growth in opportunity for patients through the clinical trials opportunity. And this includes not just high-grade serous, which we've always focused on, but also for rare tumors, particularly those that like clear cell, which I know many of your listeners and I've answered many questions about clear cell, and low grade. And of course, we've had Dr. David Kirshenson on here, who's a strong advocate, and Jubilee Brown, who because we've now launched trials that are specifically focused in these rare subgroups, and we have one trial that is moving very quickly through, that's looking at novel strategy for a treatment for low-grade serous. We opened up a trial platform trial called Bouquet, which is adding new arms every single time that we close an arm, so that now this will be 9 different arms that are going to be evaluated in that trial. So again, opportunity for rarer tumors, low-grade serous, clear cell, mucinous tumors, endometrioid tumors. So we have this new opportunity for a wider catchment of new agents coming into a treatment domain that are based on biomarkers. So enhancement of the PARP frontline strategy, new era of therapy for platinum-resistant ovarian cancer, which is, of course, is developing, and then also this opportunity for rare tumors and new drugs for those patients.
Wonderful. Thank you for that fabulous information. So moving on to 2023 then, for someone that gets diagnosed this year in 2023, are there any practice-changing directions in treatment that has taken place that we need to be aware of? And, what has or is in the process of changing when it comes to, diagnosis and just change in practice generally?
Yeah, I think that, so if you look at the spectrum for patients with ovarian cancer, we have, prevention and early detection, has been a very difficult arena to break into. But the good news there is that we're not seeing people abandon that strategy. So, obviously, when patients are usually listening here, they've already been diagnosed. And so what we're trying to do is to figure out a way to take the general population and identify a way to more efficiently screen for patients that might be at risk. And of course, the identification of BRCA mutation, as we know in the germline, is one of those strategies. But that's a small fraction of the patient population of women who ultimately do get the disease. So from patients that already have pelvic masses that may or may not be malignant, we have now some new programs that are developed to assess for cell-based screening opportunities to determine which way that may be for that patient. Obviously, we're continuing to expand on the pure screening programs, which have always been challenged because of the relative rarity of this disease as incident cases, which is what drives that problem. And but fortunately, we've not abandoned it. And so even after the UK CTOX trial, basically showed that they couldn't affect mortality by screening technology, this has not stopped the discovery component. So what I think you'll see in 2023 is the release of some new strategies to approach this that are based not only on morphological changes, so things about the actual ovaries themselves, but also cell-based therapies, cell-based screening opportunities for proteins and different cells that are identified in blood. So that's been that. I think that from that kind of the earliest component of it. In the newly diagnosed arena, we started to see the emergence of trials that are questioning the need for chemotherapy. And I know you're saying, what? Yeah. What did he just say? Yes. So we know that our highest likelihood for response to novel therapy, particularly PARP inhibitors, is in patients who carry these BRCA mutations in their tumors. And we have some neoadjuvant trials that are ongoing now that are taking chemotherapy out of the induction component. So diagnosis, then treatment, then surgery, and then treatment afterwards. And what we've seen in these, and Shannon Weston, also, a frequent flyer here with Overcome, and my good friend, and initially, I love to say she was, one of my mentees, so I take credit for all of her success. No, I'm just kidding. But she and I talked about this many years ago about whether or not we could actually put a PARP inhibitor therapy for patients whose tumors were diagnosed with a BRCA mutation, and see if we could induce responses. That trial, which is called Now, is getting ready to report, and I think that what we're seeing early on is that there is this high level of response in that patient population. So there may be an opportunity to start think about frontline treatment in a completely new way, other than just chemo or chemo plus something followed by some maintenance thing. So that's, I think, a 2023. We start seeing some direction about that. Of course, maintenance therapies I just mentioned with the Athena trial reporting. We now have 3 other trials: a trial called First, a trial called Duo, and a trial called OV43 or Key Link. So that will be the 4th trial, Athena combo, that will look at these various different combinations. These trials are set to report relatively probably in 23. At least get our initial look at them. And they'll be looking at in patient populations that are not so highly selected. So not just the BRCA patients, the patients whose tumors carry a BRCA mutation, but those that carry either the homologous recombination deficiency signal or wild type. And we'll be looking at the interaction between anti-angiogenesis therapy, immunotherapy, and PARP inhibitor therapy. So that will be a 2023 event. And then what I hope to see, we've spent so much time about recurrence, right? We talk about platinum-sensitive recurrence as being kind of this, ghost town. We don't have very many trials in that space, but we do now. So 2023 will be a time to ramp up our platinum-sensitive trials. We have 2 antibody-drug conjugates, which we could talk about a little bit later, about this form of therapy that's being added in the maintenance and in the treatment phase for platinum-sensitive patients or patients with platinum-sensitive disease, and then obviously a huge portfolio for platinum resistance. So lots of work happening in 2023.
Yeah, and I was just thinking I was understating it when I said hope on the horizon. It seems like so much is ongoing. That's so promising. Thank you for sharing that with us. Can I go back to the chemotherapy, because I'm completely, I'm so interested in that you said that we may be able to even drop chemotherapy. And the reason why I'm going back to that is, there are several overcomers that have shared with us that the toxicity and the side effects of chemotherapy has alone been a reason for them to drop treatment, because it's just something that they cannot tolerate through the process. So if you were to drop this chemotherapy from the treatment, or we were able to remove this for the patients who are responding negatively, would be completely life-changing and, altering for, that's amazing.
Right. And this is what we call de-escalation. So, we've always been, the drug development mantra has always been push until you get toxicity and then back off, right? So push to the limit and then kind of step back and say, okay, this is what we're going to go forward. So what we're trying to do with these de-escalation strategies is to capitalize on a biomarker-derived response that we think would rival chemotherapy. And so while it's very difficult to do this in the frontline setting, where we already have a proved mechanism that we know works, to displace that, to try something new, is scary, and it requires a lot of education. So what we've decided to focus on is this very tight relationship based in the lab, discovered in 2005, that these cells are highly sensitive to PARP inhibitors, and that carry this mutation. If they're addicted to this kind of process, then we might be able to affect the kind of responses that we would hope to see with chemotherapy. So I don't know that I would say, probably going too far to say we can eliminate it, but we might be able to de-escalate some of that and help avert some of that toxicity that you're just mentioning.
That's wonderful. And I know I'm on question 2 of 25,000, but I am going back to this one more time. What is the the role of AI in all this? I mean, because what I'm reading and understanding is that, AI is going to be front and center of medicine in the next 5 years. So where do you see it in 2023
So
in
artificial
relation to all this?
intelligence,
Yes.
yeah. So I think that well, first of all, artificial intelligence is a very broad term. It covers many different things, right?
Yes.
So I think we have, I mean, you can even look at this from how does AI, for instance, inform how we read CAT scans?
Mm-hmm.
So again, is there a way, a process by which data can be consumed in a way to provide, some level of prioritization for a human to look at and make a decision on? And I think that as AI, as different methodologies that involve the consumption of data from multiple sources to provide some inference on what's going on in a tumor, and with respect to biology, with response, with respect to efficacy. These types of things will start to enter into our space, and probably the area where we're seeing most, I think, success, at least now, it's tangible, is in the space of clinical trial matching. So if you think about it, if the patient goes to see a physician, there's intake forms, there's blood work, and there's imaging, and that gets put in the medical record. So then the question comes up, was what's the most effective treatment for me based on what you just got from the physical exam and everything like that. And of course, we go down and say, well, these are the guidelines, right? Well, the guidelines are very broad. They're not very personalized. Even if we talk about, well, listen, I have a specific mutation, that's still very broad, right? So the idea here is to consume all of this information and start to understand the very complex interrelationships between different dynamics that make up those features. And then essentially not necessarily spit out an answer that you have X or you have Y, but to put out a priority. And then in a clinical trial matching scenario, we would then match that to a potential clinical trial that a patient could participate in.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And this is where I was thinking in my head, AI is going to come in and say, based on the data that we have captured about a particular patient, that chemotherapy is not for you. That would save that person so much toxicity and side effects and all that everyone's facing these days, those that are responding negatively to chemotherapy. So that's where I was thinking AI could value in that directly.
Yeah. And you can look at this also in a couple of ways, and I think we've talked about this before, but if you look at in ovarian cancer maintenance, again, how much maintenance therapy is appropriate? Right. So right now, if you're on olaparib, it's 2 years. If you're on niraparib, it's 3 years. And if it's in the recurrent setting, it's till it stops working. Right. So, but if you look carefully at the curves, the survival curves in those publications, you start to realize that the patients that are on experimental treatment and the patients that are on no treatment, placebo, that their probability of recurring at either arm is the same at some point in time before you're supposed to stop treatment. Okay. And so if that's the case, then essentially we're treating patients who aren't going to really benefit from longer treatment, some patients, right? And on the other way I look at this is that we may be finding a time point where in the patient's tumor, mechanisms for resistance are being provided or being developed. And maybe before we wait for progression, we actually then use that information to change treatment or add to it to make it more efficient. And again, so those are the types of things that we could use to enhance therapy that would be much more patient specific than just kind of population-based science.
Absolutely. So on to my question number 3, finally. So I wanted to know more about, a lot has happened and we have been reading articles on PARP and limitations in the maintenance or the second line and, how it has been restricted for majority of the drugs that are available in the market. So tell us a little more about that. And also, especially for our overcomers that are already on PARP for a second line treatment, how are the options evolving for them, and what should they know about continuing or discontinuing PARP as a second line?
Yeah, so this is the whole conversation in itself. I mean, I'll try to be brief. So basically, the story is that that there were several trials that were done as a commitment for approvals that were granted in 2017, 2018, to see that, to confirm that these drugs are actually providing benefit to patients. And these 3 trials that were run basically all confirmed their primary endpoints, that they were beneficial.
Yeah.
But what happened is that with longer follow-up, they started to look at variables such as overall survival, and then went back and compared the patients who were on either one of these, randomized arms with overall survivorship in that recurrent setting. And what they saw was that it looked like that the curves kind of reversed. So in other words, that the patients that were on treatment and then switched over to being onto a standard of care treatment versus the patients that were on standard of care treatment, that their overall survival estimates were not as were lower if you looked at certain data points. Now, this caused the FDA to say, well, maybe there's something that's happening by using PARP in this particular setting. And these were in patients who carried a BRCA mutation, right? Multiple lines of prior treatment, carried a BRCA mutation, PARP naive. So the agency felt that they needed to issue a cautionary note to patients and providers, and in doing so, asked the companies to voluntarily restrict or retract their indications for treatment, not maintenance, for treatment.
Yeah.
So that started this. Now, many of us disagreed not only with the methodology, but also the conclusions based on that. And there's lots of reasons for that, which we can get into. But we disagreed with that. Nevertheless, the agency continued their prowl on this methodology, and they applied it to the the secondary maintenance setting, so the platinum sensitive patients on PARP. And what they showed, or what they stated, was that they saw similar trends in patients, with the exception of the patients whose tumors carried a BRCA mutation, for rucaparib and olaparib, and for germline only in niraparib, and asked the companies again to retract their labels. So far, the company GSK has retracted their maintenance indication for the non-germline BRCA patient cohort. Yeah. The others have been requested, but we haven't seen them actually do it yet. And again, the problem with this is that they're basing these decisions on endpoints that are many years from when the randomization actually happened, and have not been able to take into account the imbalances in therapy that happens after progression. And so that has made overall survival a very difficult and very dirty kind of, or non-specific endpoint. And in so much so that recently the European agency re-reviewed the data that the FDA had already opined on. And the word is, although we haven't seen the official documents, but the word is that they didn't agree with the restrictions that were placed on under the same data evaluation for the US. So we'll see how that all plays out. But ultimately, for me, patients that are in the frontline setting, the PARP inhibitors, I think, only were reinforced by the recent crop of data showing OS benefit with olaparib and with PALA-1. Both of those studies were reported last year. I should add that to my 2002 wins. There were a number of them, but those were kind of expected, that we saw these overall survival advantages. So I think in the frontline setting, that's fairly solid. I think in the HR proficient tumors, it's still unknown exactly what the best strategy is. And so we're still working through that. However, for patients who have recurrent disease and are on a PARP inhibitor for maintenance, right now, in my opinion, there's no, as long as they're tolerating the treatment well and are seeing benefit, we should take advantage of that. The primary endpoint to the patient is the time to the next progression for those patients. And every trial that has been done in all cohorts have demonstrated that that's beneficial. Yeah. So I wouldn't change course in that from that standpoint. For patients that have made it all the way through treatment 1, treatment 2, and have a BRCA mutation and have not seen a PARP inhibitor, right now you can't in the United States, at least, you can't administer a PARP inhibitor in that setting. So it's no longer available therapy, even if the trials have demonstrated benefit for objective response for those patients.
So what I heard you say is for the patients that are already on PARP for the second line treatment, according to you, you see no immediate need to withdraw these patients despite the FDA indications. Okay.
No, not at all.
And do the patients have, I mean, I know you cannot answer this question completely, but do they have complete awareness of the fact of what's happening? Do they have decision making,
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think they should. I think they should come to their people that are on maintenance PARP inhibitors right now, platinum sensitive recurrent disease, should talk to their physicians about what the current regulations are with respect to the drug that they're on. So like I said, they're different between the 3 drugs, even though they functionally act the same. The indications specifically are. I think many of us, and myself included here, are looking at the duration of treatment as a potential. Yeah. So I've had patients that have been on PARP inhibitors for many years, and the question is there benefit after a certain point in time? We know that the longer these patients are on treatment, particularly in recurrent setting, that there is a potential risk for secondary malignancy. We talked about that before, the AML, MDS issue, which can be particularly hard to treat if it occurs in the post-PARP setting. So I think many of us are looking at duration of treatment critically. And so if a patient had been on for 2 years, let's say, and wants to know whether or not they should continue, I think that's a really good discussion to have with their physician. I have been more providing more guidance to be careful on duration of treatment in the recurrent setting. We don't have any specific data to support that, other than we know that that there are long-term risks that are higher particularly in the BRCA mutated tumors in the recurrent setting. So and I know that many of my colleagues now are also kind of reevaluating duration of treatment.
Okay, thank you. So you briefly touched upon this, but can you tell us about the new drugs that are on the pipeline or have recently been approved for ovarian cancer, and especially for our platinum sensitive friends, because that's the majority of the population and there wasn't too many options up until today. So tell us a little more about what we are about to see in this space.
Right. So I think probably the biggest agents. Well, first of all, I should mention that for platinum-sensitive patients who have not received a PARP inhibitor, that's still an option in certain situations. But for many, bevacizumab is still a very good, well-proved drug that's available for our patients in the platinum-sensitive space. The chemotherapy backbones are still platinum-based. The partners for those platinums are ones that are kind of in the future could be changed. And the drugs that are being used to substitute for paclitaxel predominantly are ones that fall into this class of drug we call the antibody drug conjugates. And so mirvetuximab, as I mentioned before, became approved for platinum-resistant ovarian cancer, but it's being studied right now in platinum-sensitive ovarian cancer as a maintenance strategy, as well as another ADC called upafitamab, which is focused on the expression of NaPi2b, which is a specific target on ovarian cancer cells also being looked at in the platinum sensitive setting as a maintenance strategy. So so I think that those are the kind of the near term new agents going into the platinum sensitive space right now, while we work out the details of how we're going to move PARP into that arena. And again, there's a constant number of treatments that are, kind of trying to position themselves in the platinum sensitive space. But one of the reasons we struggle with clinical trials is that the expectation for outcomes are pretty good, right, with the existing therapy. So if you look at, for instance, paclitaxel bevacizumab or liposomal doxorubicin, carboplatin and bev, we have pretty good outcomes for response, progression-free survival, and overall survival expectations. So to launch a trial that will take several years to report and be big is just been a challenge for us. And but we do have, like I said, we do have some that are on the way.
That's great. Just flipping it to the other side, we have again talked to a few of our overcomers who are platinum resistant, and they go through multiple lines of therapies, and nothing seems to work in the end. So there is always that question that comes up, that when do you make the determination to stop any kind of further treatment? And I know you and I have talked a lot about AI, and I can again see the effectiveness of AI into determining something like this based on the data for that particular patient or overcomer. But in general now, how do you make that determination I know it's a difficult one, but how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a shared decision for sure. And, it's like I just went through this a couple weeks ago. So part of this is just about, baseline education with respect to the natural history of the disease. So I think that some of the difficulty in stopping treatment is not having appropriate expectation of what is available and what can be actually impacting a patient. So for me, and for any of my patients that are out there, they know that this is a discussion that starts early on, just as part of the education process. And I always tell them that when we come to a point in time when we have to make a decision to change or not change, or when we have to make a decision to change it or not, we need to balance what the expectation of outcome is versus what is what would be the natural history without any treatment. And I think many people feel that no treatment means like that's it, they just fall off the cliff, and that's not the case. In fact, most of the times, I would say many, maybe even most of the time, when we stop treatment, patients actually do pretty well for an extended period of time. What we don't want, and what we want to avoid, and I hear this all the time, and it's really hard, and I know it's so difficult and sensitive, when people say, listen, I don't care what happens to me, I just give me something. What do I have to lose? Well, you have a lot to lose, including autonomy and actually the ability to interact with family. And so for me, it's I don't feel like everybody needs to end their lives with drugs still in their blood. I just think that's just wrong. And it does strip away some of the opportunities that patients could enjoy by being off a treatment, including being with loved ones. So I have that conversation all the time, so that when the time actually does come, it's not foreign to them or the family. The other thing that we talk about frequently is that many patients feel it's that they're expected to continue to push for therapy when it's not recommended, because their family thinks that's the expectation. And so part of this, as I mentioned, is educating the family as well. And so some of my most difficult conversations have been when there's an imbalance between that expectation and knowledge within the family, particularly in somebody, for instance, who may have arrived late in the treatment course, a distant relative or something, and they're like, I heard somebody took, this potion and then their disease all went away, and why aren't you doing that? And so those are really tricky and difficult decisions to have. But I hope that with the evolving relationship that we all have with our patients and the education that goes into every step along the way, that these decisions, although they're still hard, will be well, it'll be in the framework of what is the expectation for the overall disease natural history.
And thank you for sharing this so beautifully with us, Dr. Coleman. So, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but there's the new trial called Accelerate with an AX. Okay. So tell us a little more about this trial and what is the expected outcome, and how can our patients learn more about it and other available trials, for example, and sign up for them?
Well, yeah. So the last part of that question is really important. How do you is ask? So we know that one of the greatest barriers to patient engagement with research is that nobody ever asks. So nobody says, am I eligible for a trial? Or we do even worse on our side. We never ask a patient that we know is eligible if they want to participate in a trial. That's our biggest hurdle to get over. So Accelerate is a decoy receptor. It's not dissimilar from a drug we evaluated before called aflibercept, which was a decoy receptor for VEGF. This is a decoy receptor for AXL, which is a unique ligand that has a number of cellular processes, and this has been developed not so much as an active agent on its own, but is a one that we saw that had nice synergy with chemotherapy, particularly with paclitaxel. And so this particular trial, which is now closed, is looking at this combination versus paclitaxel. And again, it's like a number of trials that we've done or ongoing, looking at combination, what we call +1 designs, that are essentially looking at chemotherapy plus a novel agent, and seeing if we can improve upon the expectation for chemotherapy alone. So we'll see. I mean, the trial was very nicely designed. We've been involved in that development program from the preclinical stage forward, so it's been nice to see it work its way through. And again, we will hear about this particular trial hopefully later this year. And hopefully this will be something we could add to our armamentarium.
And just to clarify, this is in the platinum resistant space, right?
Mm-hmm.
This one
Mm-hmm.
also.
Yes.
Okay. So, you brought up some interesting points on the clinical trials. I'll share our perspective that we get from our overcomers, right? So majority, as we know, of our patients and overcomers are being treated at community hospitals or not big academic centers like Anderson or Dana-Farber. Mm-hmm. So in several cases, or actually majority of the cases, they are not being talked about by their providers about clinical trials, what is available to these patients, and what they could do is they're not aware of the things that they could be signing up for. Then there's this whole thing about, even though a trial is recruiting, there are like 10 spots for 1,000 people that are interested. So I know this is the other side of the story, but we do get this feedback repeatedly from our overcomers. Why I'm, kind of sharing this with you is not only there is lack of knowledge that's given to the overcomers, and also you have to realize that, when a patient is in the community setting, more often than not, that person is more reliant or heavily dependent on their physician versus the others who are probably Googling and searching on their own, right? So, so there's that. And then there's also the fact that the recruitment is low for the clinical trials that are, of interest to our overcomers. Then there is this site issue that they are far away from where the clinical trials are. And so, from a eligibility, recruitment, lack of knowledge, and the proximity, the list goes on. And there are many hindrances and barriers, as you have mentioned. So what, in your opinion, could or should change in 2023 so that we can make clinical trials more available for our overcomers that are actually interested in signing up?
Yeah, yes, that's an important question. So, and it's great to have this opportunity to spread the word on this. So, as you mentioned, I served as Chief Scientific Officer for U.S. Oncology Research, and now I serve as the Chief Medical Officer for Sarah Cannon Research Institute, which is basically now an amalgamation of both U.S. Oncology Research and Sarah Cannon Research Institute into one new research organization. So, the I got interested in wanting to do that specific position because the U.S. Oncology Network and now the Sarah Cannon Network are huge, huge. Like 20% of the population with cancer in the United States is treated in one of those sites. 1 in 5. So that kind of footprint addresses this question, this major question you asked about access. We find that access in clinical trials, even at the university centers, is much lower than it could be because of the same reasons. We also find that activity at major medical centers are also limited by many of the things you just mentioned: travel, the need to stay overnight, just parking. Those are all things. So one of the things that excited me about wanting to take the job that I have now was that it allowed me to work on new mechanisms that could bring research to a broader audience. And one of those limitations is one of the things you just mentioned, which is that there are too few slots available for the 1 in 5 patients that are seen in these community centers. So, what I've been working on are a couple different models. One is a program that's focused on biomarker identification. So if a patient has a specific mutation or a specific finding amplification or a specific protein expression level on a specific gene in their sequencing assessment, that we would be able to pull that out of the medical record and identify a trial that was aligned with that. And because of this mechanism, we then can rapidly, within a 2-week time frame, bring the site online as a infusion site. So rather than having to open the trial up to 600 sites trying to find these patients, we would open it up to 5 sites. But when a site in one of those 600 that actually identifies a patient, we would activate the site, and we can do that within a 2-week window. The other strategy that we are piloting in a pancreatic tumor model is what we call COMET, and what this COMET model stands for Community Oncology Maximizing Enrollment Together, COMET. And so what this trial does is it allows us to open up a broad number of sites, but have them funnel under a single site. So that if a company says that we want to open up 100 global sites, only one site of that 100 would come from this model. But underneath that one site, we may have 25, 30, 40 sites underneath it. So we work out a mechanism to provide the regulatory assurance and safety quality that we could actually execute that trial. And that's what's ongoing right now. So that allows us to be much broader across the United States to get not only more patients the opportunity to participate, but also a broader opportunity for diverse patients to participate. Because now I can open up from sites from Florida to Seattle.
Exactly.
And so those are just some of the strategies, and I'm working on more as we go on every day to help overcome these barriers. One of which is to get in front of pharma and say, listen, you want to use the entire U.S. Oncology Sarah Cannon network to enroll 10 patients. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, that can be enrolled in a single practice. So what we try to do is say, listen, give us 100 patients, and we'll deliver. And that allows us again to expand. And so ultimately, as sites become better at enrolling patients on studies, they get more studies. It's kind of a very much a feed forward opportunity. And so we're working on that very hard.
And we'll stay tuned on that, because this is of personal interest to me to see that that more of our overcomers get that opportunity, because we always hear that there isn't enough interest, but we also see firsthand that there is sufficient interest, but there aren't spots available for for overcomers that want to sign up, so.
Yeah. And one quick postscript to this is that, you mentioned that, well, and this is very frustrating I know for many of my patients as well, is they say, well, I never qualify because of this and that and this and that. So the government, FDA, has recently put out some guidance on a way to make more pragmatic trials available. And their first trial is a lung cancer study called Pragmatica Lung. And it's using a different, less restrictions, more flexibility, and less onerous testing to make these trials easier for people to participate in and have an opportunity to not be as excluded as we've seen in previous work. So again, more to come on that as we move forward.
That sounds very, very positive. Again, I mean, 2023 seems to be opening in exactly the right direction. So, I know we are coming on time, but so let me switch gears a little bit and ask you this fun question: that if you were an overcomer for a day, just switching roles, what questions would you ask your doctor as a recently diagnosed patient or someone in treatment or in remission or in recurrence?
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to be on that, to be able to address it from that side. You know me, I'm all about clinical trials. So the first question, if I was newly diagnosed, would be, first we to lay out the, what the strategy is, and then also, is there an opportunity for participating in a clinical trial, and to go through, why a clinical trial is necessary, right? I think that's important to understand, and what it would entail for trying to alter the natural history. So I think that a question that doesn't get asked very frequently is, should I have genomic profiling of my tumor? And as time moves forward, the comprehensive nature of tumor assessment is going to get much more prevalent and much more available to patients. So it's not just about HRD, for instance, as a newly diagnosed patient, or BRCA mutation. It's about all the other things. So I would be wanting to know, when can my tumor get treated? What's the natural history of this disease? What's the treatment strategy? And is there a clinical trial I can participate in?
Wonderful. So this is, I know there is no definitive answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is there a way to prevent ovarian cancer recurrence?
Recurrence?
Yeah.
So, recurrence is all about, factors that we understand very poorly. Right now, our greatest strategy to prevent recurrence is maintenance treatment. It doesn't work in everybody, but that is our best strategy to the moment. In addition, what patients can do, and this is, gets to other factors, like how patients can be involved in their own treatment care, is staying active. Anil Asud, also another board member, close friend of mine, and colleague, a research colleague, we did work many years ago about the impact of stress and on cancer biology. We've talked about this many times here. We were able to show that the stress not only accelerates cancer growth, but the reduction of stress can actually reduce that growth and that growth opportunity. So I try to tell people when they get through treatment, or while they're on, for instance, their maintenance phase, to try to stay active. Exercise is a fantastic way to do that, but it's not the only thing, right? I like meditation. I like prayer. I like anything that gets people into that happy place where they can start to distance themselves from the disease course, because people that are constantly worrying about recurrence tend to get that happen, because it increases their stress hormones, which can have adverse effects on the recruitment of cells that are essentially dormant. So so that's something that at the personal level patients can do. But as I mentioned, the science involved about what causes recurrence is still emerging, and we've learned that there are various different factors that put cells into this what we call diapause state, where they are just offline, but for whatever reason they can get recruited back online. And so work that we're doing is trying to is trying to figure out what that story is.
Okay. So, so on that note, what would the future of ovarian cancer look like in 50 years, you think?
In 50, I hope that it's prevented. I hope we figure out a way to prevent it, because ultimately, once it's diagnosed, then it becomes genetic chaos, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to just figure out that we found a way to prevent it, and that it's something easy and can be accessible to everybody. That's my goal. 50 years is a long time. Think about what's happened since.
And that's why I asked.
Yeah, if you think about where we were in 1970, before Taxol, actually before platinum. Lots of things have changed in that time period, but we didn't get rid of the disease in 50 years, right? So that would still be my long-term goal, would be that we would be able to do something early on in when people were healthy that would completely alleviate the risk for the development of this disease.
So essentially when you and I come back as birds or dogs in our next life, there will be no ovarian cancer anymore.
There you go. There you go.
Pray for that, right? And so then if you could be remembered for one thing as a doctor, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. I would hope that I helped. I hope that I would be remembered for helping move the field forward. I feel like that's been my my calling, and I try to message this to my teams as well, is that I want their work to make a difference, and there's lots of different ways to contribute, but I would have hoped that that this work through education, through clinical research, through advocacy, somehow made a difference to somebody somewhere. Yeah. And that would be, then I knew I'd gotten there.
That's wonderful. And so my final question, Dr. Coleman, as we finish, is, as always, that's my most favorite question to ask, is as we open 2023, what message of overcoming would you have for our listeners that are listening today? So
my message always is be hopeful, and don't be afraid to ask questions. It is always difficult to walk this journey, but there is an army of people that want to walk it with you. Mm-hmm. And the resources are there, and we want to help. So be hopeful. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Learn as much as you can about this disease. Look for clinical trials, and just know that you have a lot of overcomers out there who want to help you make it through the day.
Wonderful. Such a beautiful conversation, Dr. Coleman. Thank you for sharing all your insights with us, as always. It is always so fun to talk to you and to learn about all the great science that's happening. So thank you for your time. And overcomers, hope this was beneficial for you. I know, as always, I always learned so much from Dr. Coleman. So please share this video far and wide once again to anyone who may benefit from all this information that you shared with us today. We will be back with the next episode of Connect Over Coffee very soon. Until then, you keep overcoming. Thank you and bye.
Thank you.